Well, councillors, it's 6:31 and I can see that we have more than a quorum. So I'll declare the latest meeting of the Handforth Parish Council meeting officially open. Are there any councillors? I'll just check with a couple of councillors to make sure they can hear me. Councillor De Cruz, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you and I can see you too. That's very good.
Yeah, no, excellent. It's great to see you too. And Councillor Drury, can you hear me?
Your dulcet tones are present.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much for that. Well, I'll begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and paying my respects to their elders, both past and present. Are there any apologies tonight, councillors? No apologies? No problem. Notice of webcasting for, well, I don't think there are any registered speakers. I'll just clarify that with Catherine. Catherine, are there any registered speakers tonight?
No, Mayor, there's no registered speakers.
Okay, thank you for that. I don't think I need to notify any of the councillors of the fact that the webcast takes place and that their comments are made in the public domain. Disclosures of interest, councillors. Are there any disclosures tonight? No disclosures?
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councillor Stamos.
Just going back onto the speakers list, I would have thought that for a process like this, we would have had a dozen speakers. Can you advise, or can anyone advise, were there any nominations at all? This is such an important item, generated a lot of public debate, a lot of public interest, and we haven't had a single speaker. I don't believe it.
Yeah, that is unusual. I'll put that as a question to the officers.
Mr. Mayor, no registrations were received.
There you go.
Did we actually approach anyone?
I don't think it's the obligation of the council to approach people. There's a policy in place for how people can register to speak. I agree with you. It's unusual that no one did, but we've received that advice.
Hello, Mayor. Hello.
Yes. Welcome to the Handforth Parish Council meeting.
Mr. Mayor, Councillor Passes, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Could you tell me what officers are present tonight?
Okay, just one moment. Councillor Stamos, are you satisfied with the answer or did you have something else?
Mr. Mayor, it seems like there has been a big lapse in the process that this very, very important part of community discussion and debate on rates harmonisation is not occurring tonight at our meeting. I would have expected, as I said, a list of dozens, which we would have had to cut down, of course, to a 9 or 10 or thereabouts. This has surprised me that we haven't engaged to the level that people would have wanted to address this tonight. So I'm quite disappointed that this council has not managed to get any speakers tonight at a very, very important and defining meeting. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, well, thanks for that. I'm not sure that the council can be held responsible for that based on the information that we've received, but okay, thank you for that. Well, before I move on to deal with Councillor Passis's question, I'm just going to do the moment of quiet contemplation first, if that's okay. Okay, I'll ask everyone to join me. Please join me in a moment of quiet contemplation. Thank you, councillors. So just to doubly confirm, there are no disclosures of interest. We did get to that item, but I was interrupted. No disclosures, councillors?
Mayor, could we actually have clarification from the officers with regard to that we may be ratepayers and we are voting on that item tonight, and that's not doesn't need to be disclosed?
I'll put that question to the officers.
Through the chair, being a ratepayer is not a disclosable interest.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Passis, your question. I'll ask the General Manager to identify which officers are in attendance.
Through the chair, my understanding is the Chief Operating Officer and Director Development and Recreation is in attendance. My understanding is the Director of Infrastructure is in attendance. And my understanding is that the Acting Governance Manager is in attendance, as well as myself.
Okay, thank you for that. No further discussion.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor,
Mhm.
I would like to move a motion, and it's in the interest of the Inner West community and the functioning of this council.
Is it a procedural motion, councillor?
Yes.
Right, what is it?
Well, I'm asking, Mr. Mayor, that you voluntarily stand down from this council and this extraordinary meeting until such issues about your potential suspension.
Point
have
of
been
order, Mayor, this
addressed.
is not procedural.
Mr. Mayor, if I could finish.
Please proceed.
Until the outstanding complaints against you are resolved, and the Deputy Mayor resume your seat. We are
Sorry, councillor. Sorry,
discussing.
Sorry, councillor. You've moved your motion, calling for me to stand down, which I'll rule out of order, which is obviously, as you're aware, a breach of the Code of Conduct itself to move such a motion, and a much more serious breach than the trumped-up charges that the Office of Local Government have brought against me.
Mr. Mayor, I sought
I'll
legal
rule that out
advice.
of order. I'll rule that out of order. Unless there's a motion for dissent, we'll move on with the rest of the meeting.
Mr.
No
Mayor,
motion for dissent. That is ruled out of order, councillor Passes.
Councillor Byrne,
Councillor
Byrne, could I move a motion, please?
Yes.
I've sent the to the minute taker.
No,
This is the motion pertaining to the only item on the agenda tonight.
No, sorry, councillor. No. We're not up to dealing with the business yet, councillor Porteous. Councillor Passes has sought to move a procedural motion prior to dealing with the business, calling on me to stand down as the chair, which I've ruled out of order for the reasons I've already articulated. I'm very happy to deal with motions when we get to the actual agenda items. But unless
If
you're
you could come to me first, I'd appreciate it.
Sorry, unless you're are you moving a motion of dissent in my ruling, councillor Porteous?
No, I requested that when we come to the
councillor
item on the
Porteous,
agenda
I'll
that
call
you
to order.
come to me first.
Councillors, I will, as you know, it's my practice to be as cheerful as possible during council meetings, but I will adjourn the meeting if there are continual interjections. There's been several unusual interjections so far with no relevance to the business at hand.
Well, councillor Byrne, if I could perhaps point out, it's extremely unusual to actually see you at a council meeting. This is the only meeting I think I've ever seen you at. And to see you with your
Porteous, I'll call you to order.
your big check behind you so that you can run your lines for the media is quite extraordinary, actually.
Councillor Porteous, I'll call you to order. There is
Mr. Mayor, we are calling you. We are calling you to order.
Councillor Passes, I'll issue you a warning. There has been no motion of dissent in the ruling that Councillor Passes's procedural motion is out of order. So we'll move on with the business. There are no mayoral minutes. There are no reports with strategic implications. There's one item on the agenda. And for that item, I'd like to table a primary motion, which I have circulated to councillors earlier this morning and which I have provided to the minute takers. And I'll now table that motion. And councillors, I will seek leeway, if you bear with me, just for a couple of minutes extension of time beyond the normal 3 minutes to ensure that I'm able to speak to each of the points in the motion efficiently and effectively to make sure that everybody's aware of what the primary motion is.
Councillor Byrne, can I flag that I would like to table a foreshadowed motion, please?
Thank you, Councillor Porteous. That's fine. And I'm very happy to extend the same courtesy to you. I assume yours is also a serious motion that will require more than 3 minutes to speak to. So Councillor Porteous will move the motion that I receive an extension of time of 2 minutes, seconded by Councillor Drury. All those in favour, against, declare that carried. Councillors, you'll all be aware of the recommendation that is before us tonight. And I do want to begin.
Point of order, Mayor.
Yes, Councillor Passes.
Could you please remove that prop from behind you? This is a serious issue. This is not a political game that we are discussing tonight.
Sorry, Councillor Passes, as you're aware, you're required to identify a clause in the Code of Meeting Practice if you're to move a point of order. So you haven't done that. So
well, the clause is, Mr. Mayor, that we are not to have signs larger than A3.
Yeah,
that is our policy.
Sorry, Councillor Passes, there is no clause that references what decorations or artwork might be on the room in a Zoom meeting.
We are not to display.
Councillor Passes, I will issue you a second warning. I don't wish to.
Good evening. Okay, Mr Mayor, thank you
Sorry,
very
Councillor
much.
Passos.
Good
I'll
evening,
issue-
councillors.
Councillor Passos, you have been issued a second warning. I really want to get on with the business because we have such an important and serious issue to deal with, but I won't be able to do that if there are continual interjections. I hope that Councillor Passos will be able to desist from interjections and that she'll rejoin the meeting to engage in a serious policy debate. Councillors, I'll now return to the substantive issue. We're all aware of what an important issue that we're dealing with tonight. And I would like to begin by thanking the council officers for having produced such an important policy document, such thorough community consultation, such concise and effective reporting that we're all able to come to this debate with a great and shared knowledge base. Councillors, you'll also be aware that it is the timeline of this report is dictated by those dates which have been issued to us by the IPART, the Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal. In preparation for this meeting, I sought clarification from the General Manager in regards to the statutory requirements of the process as opposed to the dates that have been provided us by IPART. And as it turns out, the statutory requirements are that there has to be a 28-day public exhibition of any minimum rate that council resolves to submit to IPART, and as well as 3 weeks community consultation. So there's more than enough time from now, according to the statutory requirements, for us to be able to press pause on this process and to later submit an application to IPART. The reason that I think we should take a breath and think carefully about our next step is that the government had promised that they would introduce a bill to the Parliament which would phase in this new rate system over a period of 4 years. But unfortunately, at this time, when we're due to submit an application to IPART, they've simply failed to table the bill. And we can't say with a straight face to the people of Marrickville, where a very large number of residents are facing significant rate increases, that we know for certain what the impact on them will be when we don't know how this will be phased in or whether it will be at all. And of course, the government doesn't control the numbers in the New South Wales Upper House. So it's not a fait accompli that whatever they table in the Parliament will necessarily be passed in an unamended form. So due diligence would dictate that it's not possible for us to make a fully informed decision about whether we should be submitting such an application to IPART. So to that end, I'll ask the minute taker to scroll down to points 2 and 3. Sorry, Catherine, are you able to scroll the screen down? Catherine, are you there? Okay, thank you very much for that. So I'm proposing that instead we write to both the Premier, the Treasurer, the Minister for Local Government and the IPART to inform them that we can't submit an application at this date and that we are awaiting confirmation of when that bill will be, the Local Government Amendment Rating Bill will be tabled in the Parliament. And we also inform them that because of the failure of the government to respond in any way to the representations from Council regarding our improper exclusion from the Stronger Communities Fund, in which, as we have all learnt, we were improperly prevented from applying for a fund that was established to support infrastructure in amalgamated communities, in amalgamated local government areas. Because of the government's utter failure to respond to any of our representations, and we have sent more than 6 letters without even an acknowledgement letter in reply, let alone a meeting, as well as the government's, more importantly, refusal to talk to us about how we might be able to access future funding through these sorts of grants programs. It means that the $24 million that we were improperly, that we would have received if the funds had been distributed on a per capita basis fairly to amalgamated councils, that enormous hole in our budget is obviously a significant consideration in our development of the 2021 budget. We can't possibly know exactly what we'll be able to do in terms of capital renewal of infrastructure, for example, if we're unaware of whether the government is going to compensate us for the money that we were unfortunate enough to be dudded out of. And obviously, we're not hoping for the $90 million that Hornsby Council got, but just something fair. would really help us to ease the rates burden and the fees and charges on local residents when they're faced with this state government imposed rate.
Point of order. Point of Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Passes.
You do not have the right to campaign and play politics from the chair.
I'm sorry, Councillor Passes. Are you going to refer to, in your point of order, to a clause in the Code of Meeting Practice?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, and I think you've spoken more than 3 minutes and you didn't
but I've
ask
got an
for
extension of time in advance and you've interrupted twice. So, Councillor Passes? No, okay. So I'll move on. I think we should also request in our correspondence to IPART that we be allowed an extension to submit the application up until the government's bill is actually tabled in the Parliament. And that in that correspondence, we should also include a copy of Council's community engagement, which we all know because we've been so well briefed by the officers, shows that the community is angry. There's lots of people in Marrickville who are feeling really let down by the system that the government is implementing. And we...
Yeah, may I move an extension of time of 2 minutes for yourself?
Thank you, Councillor. Seconded by Councillor Porteous. All those in favour? Against? Declare that carried. And we should also request from IPART and the local government minister a specific timeline for when the legislative changes to the rating system will be tabled in the Parliament. Could I ask the minute taker just to scroll down a bit further, please, so that all councillors can see the remainder of the resolution? Fourth, that we note that the New South Wales government is yet to adopt key recommendations of IPART's review of the rating system, which of course dealt with the big systemic problems that we're encountering with the rate system. None of that's been adopted. The government's kicked it off into the long grass. We should respond to everyone who's made a submission, and there's hundreds, if not thousands, of residents who have, to let us know about their concerns. We should respond to all of them to let them know about the resolution that we adopt tonight in the interest of transparency. We should ensure all future communications to residents about rates harmonisation include reference to Council's opposition to the government's harmonisation process and the fact that we were cheated out of money through the Stronger Communities program, and that we should receive an update at the March 9 Ordinary Council meeting on the response that is received from the government. There's, in closing, I'll just say this. There has been reference tonight to the fact that I've returned to video. The reason for that is that I've been able to procure a piece of equipment that allows me to do the meetings in my office. So I'm in the mayoral office as we speak. And it is true that I have displayed behind me a novelty cheque, a very large novelty cheque made out from the New South Wales government to the Inner West Council for the sum of $24 million. And that is symbolic of the money that we are owed and that we were cheated out of. And there's two blank, you just see behind me, there's two blank signature lines. One's for John Barilaro, Paul Barilaro as he refers to himself, and one's for Gladys Berejiklian, the mastermind of the Stronger Communities Fund, who personally signed off the largest amount of funding that came out of there, as well as the amendment to the guidelines. So I make no apology for being a strong advocate for the community, and any councillor who wants to criticise me for fighting for the return of the $24 million can go and explain that to the residents that I speak to in the street who want to see the money come back to the Inner West. So I'll move that way. Is there a seconder for that motion? If there's no seconder for that motion, it will lapse. Is there a seconder for the motion?
Councillor Drury and myself are happy to second.
Councillor York will second the motion. Councillor York, do you wish to speak to the motion?
Yeah, but I'm happy to wait for now.
Okay, no problem. Councillor Porteous.
Thanks, Councillor Byrne. I'd ask the minute taker if she could bring up the wording of the motion that I'd like to move as a foreshadowed motion. Look, I think that, first of all, we need to acknowledge the very significant community opposition to this proposal. It could not be more stark than the results of the community consultation that we got, where we've got overwhelming numbers opposing the proposal to go forward with the minimum 850, 820 as per the council officer's recommendation. And I note in the motion that Councillor Byrne has put forward that in fact he is endorsing the going forward with the minimum rate of 850, 820. It may be well hidden, but it's completely there. And while there's a conflation of issues, which is the need for the grants that should have come to council, for a council like ours, which has been forcibly amalgamated and didn't, which is a very valid issue. And of course, we should be pursuing it. I find it extremely disappointing that there seems to be a wish to confuse issues with the residents, because we all know that rates are fixed. So the impact on rates of the additional funding that we may seek from the government with grant monies is not in any way going to influence the amount that people pay in rates. And I do think to conflate the two issues in this particular motion is very opportunistic and disappointing. Having said that, I've frequently been disappointed with the current mayor, I have to say. In terms of the motion that I'm putting forward, I think it's important to recognise, one, that the community totally rejects the minimum 850, 820, and we should be equally rejecting that if we are elected to support and listen to our local community. Second, that there's an inherent unfairness about this rates harmonisation process. In fact, the word harmonisation in itself is a total decoy for what is in fact a deeply unfair process where you get winners and you get losers, but the winners win at the cost of the losers. So nobody's really winning in a situation where you are basing the whole process on inherent unfairness. So the only really fair way to proceed is to proceed with the status quo as we currently have, which is the three councils' rating systems, which as they currently exist, where there are no winners and there are no losers, because the current rate structure, as has happened for the last 3 years of this council term, proceed as per normal. So what I'm proposing in this motion is that we therefore write to the New South Wales Minister for Local Government and we seek the permanent retention of the pre-amalgamation rating structure. Thank you, Councillor Cruz. Of 2 minutes.
Seconded.
Thank you.
Seconded by myself. All those in favour, against, declare that carried.
Thank you. I think that the council needs to recognise furthermore that the rates harmonisation is a direct result of the forced amalgamation of our three councils of Ashfield, Marrickville and Leichhardt. And that it's one of the most tragic direct results of that forced amalgamation. And as such, we should address that issue as well. I'm not doing what Councillor Byrne is doing and trying to conflate two different and separate issues. I'm actually targeting very clearly what is a key issue in this, which is the fact that we have forcibly amalgamated councils, which are therefore forcibly forcing the rates to be harmonised in inverted commas, and therefore resulting in winners and losers. So I'm also moving that we immediately write to the New South Wales Minister for Local Government and request a referendum be authorised at the forthcoming local government elections in September this year, and ask the question, do you wish the Inner West Council to revert to previous local council areas of Ashfield, Leichhardt and Marrickville? And finally, that we write to the Premier, the Treasurer, the Minister for Local Government and IPART, and we inform that we're not able to implement their directive because it's inherent unfairness to our citizens and our businesses in the Inner West. So I would ask councillors to support this motion, which is recognising the voice of our community and responding appropriately to that. Thank you.
May I speak next? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Porteous. Councillor Patterson, are you the seconder of the motion?
No, I will
Okay,
speak
well,
after
I'm going to ask if
I'll
there's a
speak
seconder.
after the seconder.
I'm going to ask if there's a seconder for
Councillor Hesse will second.
Councillor Hesse is seconding Councillor Porteous's motion. Do you wish to speak to it?
Yes, Councillor Byrne, I will. Thank you. Also, this is speaking to the foreshadowed motion, not speaking to your motion. Look, to back Councillor Porteous up, I think I couldn't agree more that, in fact, we are here because of the amalgamation. Pure and simple. Without the amalgamation, the residents of Marrick will not be facing a significant rates rise, however you cut it, and residents in Leichhardt, some of whom wouldn't be facing a rates rise either. That's the reality. And we're here because the state government insisted on an amalgamation without consulting with the affected residents. That is a fundamentally undemocratic act. And I know we have put part of this motion, obviously, before to councillors. I'd ask that if you believe that this is indeed a hideous imposition of the state government, then you should support this foreshadowed motion, because this is the only motion that actually addresses the underlying issue, which is amalgamation. I really regret, I know that we've done some good things on this council, but we could have done those same good things on our 3 precursor councils. There's nothing that's happened in the former Marrickville LGA that couldn't and probably wouldn't have happened if we'd still been Marrickville. I have to look residents in the face and the eyes and say, when they ask the question, what's the benefits of the amalgamation? I have to say, sadly, despite the incredible efforts of our staff to make it as good as possible, and they've done an incredible job, but there have been no benefits. And for the people of the former Marrickville LGA, the motion of the Mayor, for example, will lead to increased rates. But to keep it to the foreshadowed motion, we need to move forward. We need to let the state government know in very clear terms that we want our residents to have a say on how they are governed. That is a proper and basic democratic right. I can see the attraction for some councillors to be captured, if you like, by the bureaucratic process the state government has set for us. But that, I would argue, is not the answer. Let's just go on with it. Let's acknowledge the process is there, but that the process has been set by our jailers. If we wish to remain captives, we'll ignore this foreshadowed motion. But if we want to set ourselves free, if you like, give our residents a genuine freedom of choice, then we will support, I hope you will all support this foreshadowed motion. I will end there so we don't go all night.
Thanks very much, Councillor Hesse. Councillor Passis?
Yes, well, first of all, I have grave concerns that our residents have been put through this exercise. Our staff have done all this work. We've paid consultants, and this comes up at the 11th hour. It is clear the 3 former councillors were unsustainable. That's why we're in the position we're in. And I can only say what we're doing to the residents, Ashfield residents have been paying for the nose for far too long. And to try to address this, to give them some respite and to make things a little bit more even to what they were, and what's going on here tonight, this politicking, is just unacceptable. I cannot believe what I'm hearing. We have put residents, staff and financial loss, and now tonight what we're getting, if we are not good enough to address this problem, you should just pack up and go home. This is just unbelievable. Your mayoral minute is unbelievable. Calling for de-amalgamation is unbelievable at the 11th hour, because we cannot do what we're supposed to be elected to do. This is all about politics, and Asheville residents will continue to pay $700-800 more than surrounding areas. That is unacceptable.
Sorry to interrupt, Councillor Passis. Just to Catherine, I will, if you could freeze the time. I can't see the time at all under the viewing arrangements that I've got at the moment.
That's okay. I'm finished, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Passis. Is it possible to move the clock across, or maybe it's just a problem with? Oh no, I've got it now. I interrupt now, Councillor Passis. According to the clock, you actually have 23 seconds to go. So did you want to add a bit more to your policy disposition?
All I can say is that we should be ashamed of ourselves, and I really feel for our residents. I really do, with the time wasting, the money wasting, and the political games that they have to put up with.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
Mr. Mayor.
Further discussion, councillors.
Mr Mayor.
Councillor Stamoulis.
Thank you. Mr Mayor, I cannot believe where we're at after 5 years, almost 5 years of this merger, where the key task that council was to present was rates harmonisation. And here we are tonight with two extremely different motions, two extremely different approaches. We haven't been able to bring this council together. One was received at midday today. The other was, well, just put on the screen a moment ago before us. That's unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. That's where we are as the Inner West Council right at this very moment. Major motions on rate harmonisations after 5 years of merger. One comes at midday and the other comes to us right now at the council meeting. That is unbelievable. I'm sure that those people watching tonight will similarly be quite shocked. The first motion, the Labor motion, addresses two different financial dynamics. One is a one-off hit coming from $24 million. I think we're all happy with that, Councillor Byrne. We're all happy with that. But rates harmonisation is about ongoing revenue. Our rates revenue, it's about our ongoing revenue. It's not a one-off shock and a one-off hit. You're mixing two financial concepts up, and it shows the low level of discussion that we have about finances and budgeting, that you've mixed those two up. One is about our ongoing revenue stream. It also includes, as we build new housing stock, how much that might come in to our ongoing revenue stream. And it also talks about how council might manage fairly and equitably how we distribute those rates across our community. Two different financial concepts entirely. And here we are not understanding that right now. Going back to the old three approaches of the three old councils, that doesn't address the equity issue. That takes us back to the three previous councils. I think Councillor Passos has pointed out that Ashfield's paying at the moment $700 more in rates than Marrickville, $400 more than Leichhardt. The Ashfield residents, that's for an average $1 million block, and it continues on, in fact, for block sizes. How Ashfield residents could be happy with that when they've been tied into a merger, how they could be happy with that, I simply do not understand. I have put the following amendment forward, if I could, Mr Mayor. I'm saying here, council to immediately commence demerger discussions with state government. These discussions will cover the lack of financial benefits and outcomes for our community, reduced service standards from the merger, much worse representation of residents, and ongoing financial stress. We have met no positive indicators at all, no positive indicators, so that is my amendment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll come back to that amendment momentarily. Councillors, further discussion?
Councillor Byrne, just as a point of process, I'm
yes.
just wondering whether we're going to discuss the amendment separately.
Well, yeah, I guess the issue, I might seek some advice from the governance experts at council in regards to this, because the Stamoulis amendment I won't accept into the primary motion. But it is the substantive issue already addressed, or one of the substantive issues already addressed in the Porteous-Hesse motion. So Councillor Porteous and Councillor Hesse are proposing that it should be a referendum at the next election on demerger. Councillor Stamoulis is proposing that we should enter into demerger discussions with the state government. So that would be, it would be redundant or out of order as an amendment to the foreshadowed motion if you interpreted the two things as being very similar. So I might seek advice from the council officers about how that should be interpreted.
Through the chair, I think your analysis, Mayor, is actually correct. As an amendment to the original motion, I think that could potentially stand, but it would, given that you're not prepared to incorporate it in the motion, then it would have to be dealt with as an amendment to the motion. But I think you're actually quite correct. If the original motion is defeated and the foreshadowed motion is on the floor, then that amendment would be inconsistent with the foreshadowed motion, and yeah, would not be possible to pass by council.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Councillor Stamoulis.
I'm asking therefore that Councillor Porteous and Councillor Hesse consider replacing their point with mine.
Okay, so Councillor Stamoulis that's been very helpful. Thank you to the General Manager for that advice, which I think clears things up. So Councillor Stamoulis's amendment could be moved as an amendment to my primary motion, but because it's not in conflict with it necessarily, but he's now proposing instead that it be specifically an amendment to point, whatever point it is, point, if the minute taker could scroll down.
Mr. Mayor, it was ruled out of your motion. I believe the General Manager ruled it out for your motion.
No, he just said that it would need to be dealt with separately because I'm not accepting it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Can I just get a procedural clarification?
Yeah.
Because
Go on.
my understanding is the motion that I have put forward requires a referendum for the community to decide whether they want to de-amalgamate or not. So what Councillor Stamoulis is saying is we don't want the community to decide, we'll just start demerger discussions without consulting the community. So I see it as direct conflict with my motion, and therefore to be essentially it's not an amendment I could take because it's in direct opposition to what
No, I understand. I understand.
May I ask a question?
No, sorry, I'm just dealing with Councillor Porteous's procedural
Well,
point.
I need to know. I don't
Sorry,
think,
Councillor Passos.
I don't
if you
think
could stop interjecting for a moment, Councillor Passos. Sorry, Councillor Passos. The rules apply to you too. I'm dealing with Councillor Porteus's procedural point, which
I'm asking for clarification.
Sorry, Councillor Passos. There's one set of rules for everybody. Councillor Porteous has moved a procedural point, which I'm going to deal with first, just as I would deal with your procedural point. I think Councillor Porteous is correct that when you look at that differentiation between the points, they are two separate courses of action, so they're actually in contradiction. And therefore, Councillor Stamoulis, I'll rule that your amendment could be moved to my primary motion. It's not in contradiction with the primary motion. But if you don't wish to move it as an amendment to the primary motion, then it would need to be dealt with only if the primary motion and the foreshadowed motion were defeated, because we can't have more than one foreshadowed motion tabled at once. So, Councillor Stamoulis, do you wish to move it as an amendment to the primary motion?
Well, I think I would prefer it to be a foreshadowed motion. I think
okay,
it is.
No problem. All good. Happy to go with your desire. Councillor, where were we up to? Councillor Kiat, were you waiting to speak, or had you were raising a procedural matter? No. Further discussion, councillors.
Mayor, if I may.
Yes, Councillor Drury.
Mayor, I am in full support of the position you put forward. I am in full support because it seems to me that dealing with the question of harmonisation, as we are forced to by the state government, and I think we should remember we can be forced to do a lot of things by the state government. They can force us to do a lot of things. We are forced to deal with that without them dealing with a very key issue which would help us to mitigate some of the impact on those in our community who are most concerned about this matter. I speak particularly of those residents from Dulwich Hill who have raised with me real concerns about a 20% jump in their rates in 1 year. So it seems to me, and we have called, as the local government industry has called for this government to deal with the question of some phasing in process for some time. Failed utterly to get this into Parliament. And we shouldn't be surprised because this government has also failed utterly to deal with the IPART review into rates. The IPART review, which suggested that councils be given greater flexibility when setting rates within municipalities, which addressed the key and complicated issue of capital improved value rather than unimproved value, which addressed the question of additional assistance that could be given to pensioners. The government has failed to do that. I'd also like to address the point about keeping our existing rate structure and what a farce that would be. Keeping the existing structure with 3 different amounts of rates across the municipality would create confusion, would create a difficult situation when we were looking at the question of service standards and what facilities and what infrastructure to put into particular communities. And the very question of the infrastructure is why we come back to the fact that we're also ripped off $24 million out of the Stronger Communities Fund. I'd urge everyone to support the Mayor's motion.
Thanks very much, Councillor Drury. Further discussion, councillors?
Yes, I'd like to speak in support of the foreshadowed motion and against the proposal, which buried in that motion is the support for the proposal that was put on exhibition.
Please proceed.
Sorry?
Please proceed. You said you wanted to speak. I was acknowledging that you had the floor.
Are you not hearing me?
I can hear you now. Please proceed.
Okay, I'm speaking against the foreshadowed motion, which against the primary motion, and in support of the foreshadowed motion. It's clear that the primary motion tries to hide in point 3 that that we're still supporting a proposal which was so emphatically rejected by our community in the community consultation. And it's unclear what you mean by sending that to IPART. Do you expect them to say, oh, well, last year the community rejected it, so we're not going to do that? I think it's incumbent on us to make the decisions that we have to on rates. We only need to go to IPART if we're going to raise the minimum rate above the current rates within the council areas. And at this point, I think it is actually quite fair to defer any rate harmonisation until September, where our community is given a chance to actually vote on whether they want to de-amalgamate or whether we proceed with the amalgamation. Our community has been seriously impacted with losing services, with losing access, losing democracy. I think the table that's prepared is slightly misleading of the services that have come to the community since amalgamation. I mean, one of the key ones is actually knowledge of when DAs are being put forward. We used to have flooding alerts, which alerted the community to when something was happening, and we don't have that anymore. So in fact, we've lost quite a few things. So I think to argue for a rate rise and where the community's lost services is quite unfair. And in fact, we didn't identify any of the benefits for a rate rise. So for that reason, I commend to you the foreshadowed motion and to actually reject that model that's been exhibited and to actually put a referendum to our community to decide on whether they want to proceed with the merged councils. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I think it's an opportune moment then to put the question to the council officers in regards to, I'll ask that they be given a little bit of leeway and dispensation here just to explain in complete fullness precisely what the situation is. I'll put the question to the General Manager or whoever he would like to delegate. What is the current situation with IPART? What are our statutory obligations? What have IPART informally said to the council? And what is the outcome if there is no minimum rate set forward by council at all?
Through the chair, IPART has set a deadline of the 8th of February for submission of minimum rate applications. Council approached IPART and was able to negotiate an extension of that deadline to the 1st of March. The reality is that there is no statutory deadline that IPART is required to achieve. They are required to undertake a number of processes, and their website indicates quite clearly that those processes take approximately 6 weeks. So if we work backwards from around mid-May, which is when they would need to inform us of whether or not a minimum rate was approved, then one would assume that IPART could safely receive an application through to probably the end of March. I've contacted an officer of IPART, and they have indicated to me that IPART would, or the tribunal would consider an extension of time for lodgement of a minimum rate application, but it would never do that unless that was lodged prior to the current deadline, which is the 1st of March. As it turns out, there is one tribunal meeting before the 1st of March deadline, and that takes place tomorrow. So if council was minded to seek an extension of time, either to a date or to a time in the future where the particular legislation is actually entered into Parliament, then it would need to resolve to do that tonight in order for us to lodge that request for extension and have it considered by the tribunal tomorrow. Is that sufficient? Yeah.
Not quite. I also asked if I could also ask you just to address, as specified earlier, the what occurs if no application is submitted from council at all.
Council has essentially a number of options. One of them, as indicated, is to seek a minimum rate through IPART. The deadline for that, as I've indicated, is currently the 1st of March. The second option it has is that the Office of Local Government has been delegated authority to set minimums or to consider applications to set minimums, but the limit on that delegation is that councils who go to the Office of Local Government have to choose a minimum rate that already exists in one of the legacy councils. The deadline for that process is the 28th of February, which is kind of the end of this week. If council believes that not doing anything is not doing anything, I need to inform them that if you do neither of those things, then in the absence of a minimum rate that's been set by either IPART or under delegation by the Office of Local Government, then council would be forced, if it chose to have a minimum rate in its rate structure for next year, it would be forced to accept the statutory rate, and the statutory rate at the present moment, with the normal rate increase, would be $565, which would shift the rate burden significantly to higher valued properties in the current rating structure.
So, and I'll just ask you just to extrapolate a little bit more on that last point. So when you say shift the rate burden, could you just describe in practical terms for any members of the public who are listening what that means?
Yes, Chair. Just want to make sure that the microphone was still working. Essentially there would be a pretty significant reduction in rates for ratepayers at the lower end of the unimproved capital value, particularly people in units, and that would include units, not only in locations that that are not necessarily all that picturesque, but it would include, in some cases, units that have an improved capital value that is quite significant. So it would reduce the rates for those people, and it would shift that rate burden to people whose unimproved capital value is somewhat higher.
Question to the
Sorry,
chair.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask a question?
Now, I'm just trying to recall precisely where we're up to. Councillor De Cruz, you've already spoken. So what I might do is I will come back to you, but I just wanted to clarify, is there any other councillor who hasn't spoken who wishes
Well,
to?
I don't think those
Yes, I would
answers
like
are
to
quite
speak.
clear.
I would like to speak
I
to
knew there was someone I'd forgotten.
Councillor Porteous's
Yeah.
what she has put up.
No, well, Councillor Passage, you've already spoken.
Point
as
of
well.
order, though, Mayor.
Yes.
Councillor Cruz wants to ask a question. She's not asking to speak.
Oh, sorry,
Normally
my
we allow
mistake. No, we
I had
can't.
I
Sorry.
wanted to ask, no, can I not speak to
Sorry,
Councillor
Councillor
Porteous?
Passes. I will not miss out on a question from Councillor De Cruz. We all know how
I think you took over my question.
important they
so
are.
my
Councillor De Cruz, please proceed.
Oh, thanks, Chair.
Please proceed.
My actually question to, I mean, the problem we have now is you're proposing to put a submission to IPART for a proposal that was roundly rejected.
Sorry,
so
Councillor De Cruz.
The question I have
Yes, please
to
proceed.
the General Manager
Yes.
is to seek clarity on his on that second point about the requirement to make a submission to the OLG for any other rating model. And also, I will note that the foreshadowed motion says we are writing.
Sorry, Councillor De Cruz, I'm still unsure as to what the question is.
Yeah, it's the clarity about when we actually have, when we currently have to make statutory decisions about these things. And I do feel that we have been hijacked
Sorry,
as
Councillor De
councillors.
Cruz, I'm still unsure what the question is.
What is the time frame for making?
Point of order. Chair,
What is the
can we
time
get to the
frame
question?
for making proposals and preparing a proposal which you can actually exhibit for the community to comment on?
Okay, well, I'm still not sure I totally understand the question, but I'll just go back to the General Manager to articulate the timeframes again.
Through the chair, there are two routes that council could choose to set a minimum rate for the 2021-22 financial year. The Office of Local Government has been delegated authority to determine minimum rate applications. It has a deadline of the 28th of February for submissions, and its delegation is limited to minimum rates that already existed in the legacy councils. So you cannot choose a minimum that didn't previously exist in one of the legacy councils previously. The alternative to the Office of Local Government is to go to IPART. The IPART deadline is currently the 1st of March, and the IPART has no restrictions in terms of what value you might put on a minimum rate.
But sorry, so we're now in a current position that we have no choice but to go to IPART because you're suggesting it's too late to go to OLG, which cannot possibly be the situation.
I'll put that question to the officers. I'll put that question to the officers.
I thought I had said the 28th of February was the deadline for the Office of Local Government submissions, and it's not the 28th of February yet. So you still have time if you wish to go to the Office of Local Government.
Without consulting the community.
Sorry, I'm going to rule that that's a rhetorical question.
No, that's a question. How can we consult the community?
I'll put that question to the officers.
Through the chair, I'm quite happy to answer questions, but I'm fearful at the present moment that I'm entering into a debate, and I don't think it's appropriate that officers enter into debates.
I'm asking for advice on how
okay, I'm just going to
point of order.
Yeah, sorry, I think I can envisage what your point of order is, Councillor. Councillor De Cruz, this is not a cross-examination of the council officers. You've asked specific questions eventually, and they've been answered to the best of the ability of the officers. It's not as the general manager suggested. It's not appropriate for them to be asked to enter into the debate.
Mr. Mayor.
Councillors, further discussion.
Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Stamos, you've already spoken to the motion.
That's right. A question through the chair to the general manager, if I could.
Yeah, of course. Now, just momentarily before you do, Councillor Macri, are you okay to take over chairing for a moment? I just need to step away from the screen only for a minute or two. Councillor Macri, you there?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. I'll hand over to you.
Councillor Stamoulis, you want to ask something to the... Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Macri. In terms of the Greens motion of returning or retaining, I should say, the Ashfield, Marrickville and Leichhardt council rates as they exist now, does the general manager have any advice whether that can actually be done, or would IPART most likely not allow that? Or is there some precedent in other councils that have merged as to what they've done? Thank you.
Through the chair, I'm not aware of any council post amalgamation and that has not ultimately adopted one harmonised rating system for the new local government area. And I would find it extremely hard to believe that either IPART could consider that appropriate. I would consider it. I don't think it would actually be consistent with the current legislation, and from a practical perspective, I think attempting to manage three separate systems while you're attempting to be one council would be administratively enormously unwieldy.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Jury, I'll see you.
Can I ask a question to follow up on that? Brian, would the proposition to maintain three rates post June the 2021 be in contravention with section 218CB as referenced in our report?
I believe that would be true.
So Chair, I think we cannot, my understanding is we cannot be considering a motion which would end us doing something which is not legally permitted.
So that's, I think that's correct. I think the motion.
And that's what I tried to bring up when I wasn't permitted to.
I'm wondering if it's out of order.
I would like to follow up on that. That's what I tried to ask and I wasn't permitted to. This whole discussion is about rate harmonisation. Well, this is what we're told we have to do. The Greens motion is completely out of order, and I cannot understand how this wasn't raised by the chair when it was put forward.
Okay.
Through the chair, if I could just clarify, and again, I don't want to enter into debate here, but my reading, and I suspect the chair's reading of that motion, is that point 4 just notes that the only fair way to proceed is to remove winners and losers. It doesn't actually, I don't believe, actually advocates that those rate structures be retained.
I'm sorry, Brian, but
Councillor Passes, don't interject. I want to hear from the general manager first. When he's finished, I'll let you speak.
Thank you.
Can I clarify as well?
Yep. Brian, can you finish off?
Yeah, I was just making the point that I didn't believe that point 4 actually advocated keeping the Ashfield, Marrickville and Leichhardt councils. It begins with the word notes. But yes, the mover of the motion would perhaps be better served to respond to that.
Then I'll just query that. It says point 5, therefore, immediately writes the New South Wales Minister seeking permanent retention of the pre-amalgamation rating systems.
Yeah. Can I just clarify that, please?
Yep, Councillor Porteous, please do.
Yeah, it's the motion, as noted by the General Manager, is not an instruction to council to continue, because the reality is we're currently paying the rates of our exists of the legacy councils. So if you live in Leichhardt, you're currently paying Leichhardt rates. If you live in Marrickville, you're currently paying Leichhardt rates. So that's the current situation. What this says is it notes that the only fair way to proceed. So it's making a statement. It's not instructing the council staff to do anything. What the next point does is says, write to the minister and seek permanent retention. So it's asking that we seek permission to continue the current structure. It's not saying we continue the current structure, but it's seeking permission from the minister for that to occur. So I think in that sense, it's perfectly legal to note what winners and losers are. This is our current structure. This is how we're currently working, and therefore to request that that continue on after the deadline is what we're asking. Yeah.
Okay, Brian, can you just clarify? Yeah, well, I just need clarification on what Councillor Porteous said. With point 5, can you clarify that, Brian?
Through the chair, yeah, my reading of this is that point 5 is actually asking the government to make it lawful for us to retain pre-amalgamation rating structures. So it's not actually asking for us to do something unlawful, it's actually asking the government to make it lawful.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Passis, you want to comment?
This asking for a referendum and what the general manager, acting general manager, interim general manager said is completely true. This motion should not have even been debated. It's called, this whole thing, the reason we're here tonight and all the money and time's been spent is we must harmonise the rates. The political games played here tonight are absolutely unbelievable. The staff time, the interim general manager having to answer these questions because people are campaigning is absolutely unacceptable. We were told we must harmonise the rates. And what has transpired here tonight is absolutely a comedy. And every councillor should stop and think what they're doing.
Point of order, please, Chair.
Yes.
I understood that Councillor Passis was going to ask a question. He seems to have done another speech, which is already spoken.
Yes, no, I wanted to speak to you. That
Well,
motion.
no, but sorry, Councillor Passis. You're either speaking with a speaking limit, and I believe you've already.
You're speaking to your. She was speaking to your motion. She hadn't spoken to your motion.
Okay, so.
And I'm asking the general manager, that motion should not have even been accepted for us to debate.
No, Councillor Passis, he already commented on that.
Well, I will also state, I still have time. I will also state, everybody is afraid to make a decision. You were elected to make decisions in the best interest of the ratepayers. You cannot continue with 3 different rate structures. Keep going over the same thing over and over again. It's absolutely ridiculous. The fairest outcome, that should have been addressed in the proper manner. There will be winners and losers, but the I part and the government did not seem to be wrong when the former Ashfield Council hit the Ashfield ratepayers with 38%, 0.9 increase, which they were misled, which has been in perpetuity. And they were quite happy with IPART and they were quite happy with the government then when that was accepted.
Okay.
But now they're the worst people in the world.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Passis. Are there further speakers? Councillor Hesse.
Thanks, Councillor Macri, and thanks for stepping into the breach once more. I think there are 2 things to be said about this. I think clearly the intention of the foreshadow motion that Councillor Porteous has moved and I've seconded is to hold the structure where it is until the residents have an opportunity.
Sorry, point of order, Mayor, Deputy Mayor.
Yes.
So can we just be a little bit clear? I believe that Councillor Hesse has spoken in favour of the motion that he has
I was
seconded.
clarifying, Councillor Drury, and I will move on to the substantive motion from Councillor Byrne in a moment.
Councillor Jury, I'm happy to hear from councillors. It's a really important item, and I don't think we should be stopping people from speaking. We only have one item on the agenda, and I think we should be as open and transparent as we can. Thank you.
Thanks,
Councillor.
Chair, and I do respect what Councillor Drury has to say. Nonetheless, I do think the point is to freeze it there and then to move on to a discussion with the community about where we want to go. To go to the substantive motion, though, and I think this is, for all the hyperbole around it, what it amounts to is that the mover and the seconder are asking essentially to move the process on towards harmonisation. And as I acknowledged there, if you think that the Inner West Council should remain as Inner West Council, then there is, of course, an internal logic to that. It's unimpeachable in that sense. The question, though, is whether who's going to own up to the fact that the result of supporting the motion by the Mayor and Councillor Drury, I believe, is that every resident of Marrickville will pay a significant increase in their rates, and quite a few people in Leichhardt will pay an increase in their rates. Some people in Leichhardt won't. I think it comes back to the problem, and it comes back to the amalgamation. I think this is the ultimate problem we're dealing with. Is the amalgamation has caused this problem. We are dancing to a tune set by the state government, and we're not pushing back. And I think that's my problem with with several problems here, but my ultimate problem with the motion of the Mayor is that for all the pizzazz around it, the noise around it, we're still dancing to the same tune, which has been called by the state government. And that tune has caused immense hardship for a lot of people in this area. It's caused a lot of pain and suffering for the staff. And I want to acknowledge again the great work of the staff and the difficult situation this discussion tonight puts them in as well. It is indeed extremely horrible, and I take no joy in it at all. But you have to come down to the basics. Do you trust the community to assay their own future, to have a say in their own future? And that's why I can't support the Mayor's motion. Of course, the Greens would like. I mean, it was Greens MP David Shoebridge who discovered this rort in the first place by the state government and is putting the state government through the mill right now on behalf of the people of New South Wales, who should rightly be outraged by the pork barrelling, the narrowness of this state government, the refusal.
Yes, sorry, that's your time's expired. Can you
okay,
wind up?
I will end there. Thank you, Councillor Macri.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Councillor. Councillor, may I speak?
Sorry,
Councillor
Councillor, please. You've had,
Councillor Steer.
Councillor Steer, please.
Thank you very much, Councillor Macri. I think it's important to point out that there are good points in both motions, but I will be supporting the foreshadowed motion. And the reason for that is this. It's not really well publicised that all this trauma that we're having to go through in deciding what to do with the rates will not actually increase the pool of rates income that is, or revenue that is available to council to spend. That amount of money will stay will stay the exact same amount. What will happen is that the residents of Marrickville and Stanmore wards will dramatically have dramatic increases. Other wards will have a decreasing in rates, in order so that the rates are harmonised. However, we have heard from the members of the community resoundingly that they oppose any change in the rates. Now, that's understandable because nobody wants to pay more. People love paying less, but that's not really the issue. Sometimes what's really the issue is this. This is being forced upon us by the state government without a great deal of consultation or education of the public about this.
We've already gone through in the last 4 years at Inner West Council a great deal of trauma and stress, and we've spent our entire time harmonising 3 very different systems in many different ways that are important to the members of the community. And this will be an ongoing process for a very long time. There is no need to rush this process. The only pressure is coming from the state government. We could actually take the time and spend the time to look at what's really the best option and phase it in. I understand that IPART will allow us to phase it in over 4 years, so that the pain, if anybody suffers any pain, is decreased. But really, we need to take a look at why this is happening, what we need to do about it, and send a clear message to the state government that they're not giving us money, they're not doing anything but push us around and make us do things before we're ready and before they give us any funding to help us do it, and to the detriment of the residents of the Inner West. And for that reason, I'm supporting the foreshadowed motion, because that is the only way we can send a clear message to the state government. Thank you.
May I ask a question to the
Yes.
General Manager?
Yes, councillor Passes.
Yes. Is it appropriate that the Mayor leaves the meeting to post things on Facebook?
Chair,
Comments?
councillor Passes, that's not an appropriate question for the actual General Manager to answer. I'm going to rule that out of order. Okay.
The Mayor is putting posts on Facebook. Well, we are discussing this serious issue. He
Councillor,
leaves the meeting.
Sorry, Councillor Macri, I've just returned, and to quote the great Councillor Passis, I think I might be living rent-free in your head, Councillor Passis. Happy to return
No,
and
Mr. Mayor,
assist with
I'm
the chairing of the
charging-
meeting.
No, Mr. Mayor, I'm charging you
Your
top
fixation
dollar.
on my wall decorations and my activities is getting out of hand, my friend.
I'm charging you top dollar.
Let's get on with the business, Councillor Passis. You might need to distract yourself for a little while. Now, councillors, we've had a lengthy and interesting debate. I just want to summarise where we're up to. We've got a primary motion from myself and Councillor York, which would see us write to the government, indicating that we're not submitting an application at this time, and seeking clarification about a whole range of matters, but primarily when the bill will be tabled, to ensure that the state government's new rating system could be phased in over time. And then we've got a foreshadowed motion.
Mr. Mayor, can you clarify?
Sorry, Councillor Stamos, I'll come to you in a moment. I'm just trying to make sure that everybody's up to date with where we're going. And we've got a foreshadowed motion, which would specifically not submit, it's a final decision, in effect, not to submit any minimum rate application at all. So we all know that, as we all know, that is in effect adopting a minimum rate of $565 for residents, because that's the statutory requirement for councils that decide permanently not to submit an application. Then we've got the stimulus amendment, we've got the stimulus further foreshadowed motion, which is actually not officially on the books because you can only have 2 motions at one time. But if both motions were defeated, then we would consider the foreshadowed motion from Councillor Stamos. Are there any further amendments to the motions, councillors?
Chair, I've listened to the debate. I'd just like to say a few words.
Yes, Councillor Macri.
I note there's no room for me to get in another alternate motion, but I'll note, councillors, it's not a good look for the Inner West Council to go up. The message is never strong when it's diluted, when it's a fractured vote. If you want to send a strong message to the government, you need to have some sort of unanimous sort of position. I know that's very difficult on the Inner West Council. I think we probably need more time to work on this. I'd actually like, if I could, I'd like to move that we write to IPART and ask for a deferral until mid-March to submit something. And I think councillors need to understand one thing. We do not own this process. It is not our process. We don't determine the harmonisation. It is not ours. It is solely and beholden on the state government. And I think people are taking ownership of something they don't own, and the state government needs to get their medicine, whether it's good or bad, whatever comes out of it, it is their process. There's only one job that council has been given in this process, and that is to set the minimum rate. So we have to be confident and sure that the minimum rate represents an equitable distribution of the rates burden in our community. So if we need a little bit more time to get behind that position, I think we should exercise that. And I'll just throw a question at the General Manager, if I could. The cost of de-amalgamation, what would it be? Is there any figure envisaged?
Through the chair, I would be just guessing on a number, and I wouldn't want to guess.
Would it be something huge or something small?
One could expect it would be substantial.
Substantial. Okay. So that would be another cost burden that the residents would have to actually absorb. The other thing that really I'm challenged by is when councillors talk about the deterioration of services. I know I have mentioned some issues, and I'm happy to stand by those. And, you know, what everyone's seen with the verge mowing, what's happening, and there's been an explanation given by staff, and I accept that. But remember this, it's not the state government that controls the service levels, it's the councillors. And it's your focus where you put the funding to maintain your services. It's nice to go out and outstretch and do a whole lot of new things, but you have to make sure you are doing the actual things you need to do well, the things that people loved about the area. And I'll leave it at that. If my amendment gets up, I think it's better we actually do work a bit more on this and try and provide a united front, not something that is actually seen as fragmented. That's all I'll say. Thank you.
Could I ask a question?
Thanks very much, Councillor Drury. Now, Councillor Drury is moving an amendment proposing that we defer consideration until mid-March of the officer's report. That is the same resolution as a component of the primary resolution of the primary motion. So it can't be an amendment to the primary motion. It is in contravention of the foreshadowed motion. So it would become the third foreshadowed motion, which would only be dealt with if all of the other foreshadowed motions had been defeated. So I'll ask the minute taker just to take note of that, although I'll note again that is not able to be tabled officially as a motion because you can only have two motions on the books at any one time. Councillor De Cruz, did you have another question?
Actually, it related to Councillor Macquarie's, that it sounds like we also need to request an extension from the Office of Local Government.
No, I don't think that is accurate, Councillor De Cruz. No one is proposing that we submit an application to the Office of Local Government. So the officers have explained that there's two tracks. A minimum rate application could be submitted to IPART or to the Office of Local Government. In this instance, neither primary motion proposes that, so it's not relevant.
No, it was to Councillor Macquarie. That's okay.
Well, Councillor Macquarie is only proposing that he's proposing an amendment, as he termed it, that would seek a deferral from IPART, as I understood it, because that's the only agency that's referenced in neither of the motions.
Yeah.
Okay, he's confirmed that. Did you have a further question, Councillor De Cruz? I don't want to miss out on any.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, no problem.
Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Stamoulis, don't want to miss out on your questions either. Please proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, constantly throughout our debate, when we've talked about the question through to the General Manager, constantly talk about our debate of what is the cost of a demerger. We come up with a significant number, but we never come up with the actual cost of continuing the merger, which in fact would be far more.
Sorry, Councillor Stamoulis, sorry, Councillor Stamoulis, this really does sound like a speech, so I'm going to ask you to pose a question or to
Well, then
remain
my-
relevant as well.
My question would be, Mr. Mayor, that the general manager tell us the cost of demerging and also the cost of continuation of the merger actions, both components, not just one. Thank you.
Yeah, that really is just a philosophical or a theoretical question, Councillor Stamos. It's a
It's
statement,
not,
really.
Mayor. No, it's not.
Okay, well, I'll put the question to the General Manager, and I think you'll find that he has a similar answer to the one that was posed by Councillor Macri. Councillor, I'll put that to the General Manager.
Chair, I think you're channeling me. No, I wouldn't be able to answer that question. I would not be able to put a number on that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. Councillors, further discussion?
Councillor Byrne.
Yes. Councillor Kiat.
Yeah, I'd like to contribute to the discussion.
Please do.
Believe it or not, I think despite all the previous speeches, I believe I have something new to say.
Excellent.
I think what has been said about the problems caused by the state government is all correct. What's been said by Councillor Porteous and Councillor Hesse with regard to the amalgamation is correct. There should have been a referendum on the amalgamation, and it still should happen. I think people should still have a say. It's also correct to say that the way that the government has dealt with the amalgamation funds, the Stronger Community Fund, has been totally corrupt, and I think that that's basically all out in the open now. So we can talk about that to death, and I think we should sheet the blame home for the disaster of this process to the state government. That's the right thing to do, and we should be seeking improvements from them where we can. But I think it's, one thing I've learned on council is that the state government doesn't really like us, and it doesn't really want to do what's in the best interest of our residents. I guess you only need to look at the Stronger Community Fund to know that. You only need to look at the amalgamation to know that, or WestConnect. So I think part of what we do tonight has to deal with the reality that we are harmonizing our rates, and unless there's a huge change, we need to decide on a minimum. And so that's really where I want to talk for the remaining minute that I have. I don't think there's been a lot of discussion about it, although there's been a lot of hard work by councillors involved in briefings, and of course all of the work of the officers that went into providing that information to us. I think one thing that we need to be discussing separately to the issue of harmonization is what is the correct minimum. And I think actually, I wish we had that conversation with the community. We actually haven't. We haven't said to the community, if the rates are harmonized, which minimum would you prefer? We just went to the community and said, do you like this 850 minimum? And I think if we had asked, well, do you want a minimum that will cause huge spikes for a large number of properties, 16,000 households with increases of over $200, I think they would have said that's not a good option. But that's the best option we have if we don't get a higher minimum. So I think it is important that whatever we do tonight, that
I'll move an extension of time of 2 minutes, seconded by Councillor Porteous. All those in favour, against, declare that carried. Please proceed.
I think it's important.
I think we've lost you, Councillor Kiat.
Councillor Byrne, can I ask a
Tom's
question
frozen,
and we can wait until Tom is unbroken?
Yeah, no problem. Councillor Lockie.
Okay, so I have a series of questions. I hope that's all right. So I guess the first question relates to the primary motion. Obviously, that motion still seeks to push back against the deadline that we've been allocated by IPART when it comes to submitting the minimum, although it is still covered in a sense with point 3. Can I understand through you, Chair, to the relevant officer a little bit more about whether we are still facing a risk of being left with only the statutory minimum as an option under that motion?
I'll put that question to the General Manager.
Through the chair, if I could see the motion as it is actually being proposed, I would be able to answer that question a lot easier. That's not the motion. Yeah, through the chair, I believe that point 3 is requiring us to request an extension of time to IPART, and providing we lodge that tonight or very early tomorrow morning, then I think the tribunal would at least consider an extension of time. Whether it would leave it as undetermined as when a bill is tabled, or whether IPART actually chose a date, I think it's more likely that they would choose a date. But providing they actually make a decision, and I would be reasonably confident that they would respond sympathetically to an extension. Then I think the risk that we would end up with the statutory rate is probably relatively low.
And then can I ask another question through the chair? If that's the case, if that all plays out, then would we be effectively resolving to adopt the minimums that are in the consultation report, or would that be a decision to be made at the 9th of March meeting when we consider the responses we've had from IPART and the government?
Well, sorry, just in regards to that, Councillor Lockie, I'm not going to allow the General Manager to reinterpret the very specific and deliberate wording that I've provided in my motion.
No, I just wanted to clarify that point.
Well, I'll clarify the nature of my motion rather than delegating it to the General Manager. There is nothing in the motion which the motion specifically states that we should not submit an application. It's in the first paragraph. Okay. Sorry, the second paragraph. Point 2, that we should not submit an application. So I'll address the misinterpretations that have been made by other councillors in my right of reply, but I'm not going to be verbal in pretending some Orwellian concept that a motion which doesn't submit an application is submitting an application. It's not the case.
Okay. I can see Councillor Kiat's back, so I'm happy to let him finish his remarks, and then if you can come back to me afterwards.
No problem. Councillor Kiat, can you hear me?
Yeah, thanks. Fell victim to some kind of cyber attack. Look, I think I was just concluding. Look, the ward that I represent, the Jura-Woonang ward or the Ashfield ward, a lot of residents will benefit from the harmonisation, and that's a good thing for them. And it's an outcome which results from a fair application of a standard rate across the entire LGA. And there are a lot of residents who will not benefit from the harmonisation, who will see a rate increase. And tonight, I'm really concerned for them. I'm concerned to ensure that they aren't stuck with the worst outcome. They aren't stuck with a rate increase that is unjustifiably high. So I think it is essential that we phase this in. I think it is essential that we do what we can with the domestic waste management charge subsidy to ensure that the impact is lessened. And I also think it's essential that we look really closely at the minimum rate, and having considered the very, very complicated information that's been presented to us, and in the imperfect system that we have, I do think that the 850 minimum is going to be the rate that is going to deliver a fairer outcome for those residents in Dulwich Hill that I represent.
Okay, thank you for that. Further discussion, councillors? Councillor Lockie.
Yeah,
Councillor
thank you. If I can continue with questions initially, and
please proceed.
Through you, Chair. The $565 statutory minimum that we would be left with, I guess, under the foreshadowed motion, should the rest of the demerging stuff fall down. through you, Chair, do we have an indication? We know from the analysis, I know we haven't seen an analysis of what that 565 would look like across the board. We have seen it, as Councillor Kia intimated, for some of the other minimums that we were looking at 710 and so forth, and we could see that that was leading to much more extreme rate rises for people who were experiencing a rise. Do we have any sense of, if we're implementing at 565, what proportion of our rate paying base might be looking at those much more extreme rises?
I'll put that question to the officers.
Through the chair, unless one of my directors has some recollection of an earlier briefing of councillors that contemplated 565 as a minimum, I didn't believe that we had ever done any analysis of that, and as a result, I'm not sure that I could actually answer that question.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Lockie?
That's fine. Sorry, my daughter's trying to bring me dinner while we do this. Just pop it over there.
Well
Honey.
trained.
Sorry. Yeah, I know.
That's good parenting.
And look, can I ask, because I don't know that a lot of residents would have seen, who, we had many residents comment on this throughout the process, who only unfortunately saw the impact of the harmonisation of rates. Obviously, that's only one question that we'll be looking at as we prepare the budget for 2021. There are some tables within the report that we're considering tonight that look at what the potential harmonised domestic waste management charges and stormwater charges would do. I wonder if through the youth chair, if the general manager could clarify, because I certainly needed some clarification around that, what those tables are actually saying and what broadly the impact of the harmonising all of those charges would be on the former council areas.
I'll put that question to the officers.
Through the chair, page 8 of the agenda has 3 tables: Table 1, Table 2, and Table 3. Table 1 indicates what the rates would be under the legacy councils, for the legacy councils at different land values. So it goes 500,000 through to 5 million, and indicates that under the proposed Inner West rate structure, a resident with a land value of $500,000 would pay $850. If they had been in any of the other, the former councils, they would have had quite a different number: 710 for Marrickville, 686 for Leichhardt, 1229 for Ashfield. The reason for Table 2 is to indicate that with the proposed harmonised domestic waste management charge, if you include that in the calculation, then the numbers become quite different. The proposed Inner West charge for, say, a $500,000 property, with the domestic waste management and stormwater charge included in Table 2, the proposed Inner West charge would be $1,339. That would be far closer to the Marrickville rate of $1,314, a little bit higher than Leichhardt and a little bit lower than Ashfield. The only reason for Table 3 is to recognise the fact that the stormwater charge for units is actually $12.50, not $25. So it's slightly different if you're in a unit. But Table 2 is just indicating that harmonising the domestic waste management charges balances some of the impacts that would take place if rates harmonisation was done by itself.
And look, I think that's probably covers most of the questions there. If I can just speak to the item briefly.
Please do.
Yeah, look, I mean, I have to echo Councillor Stamoulis's comments on this item. I mean, in terms of governance and process, it's and bearing in mind that we did come to this fairly late last year as well in terms of when we had to meet these deadlines. It's not great to get to the last gasp when we're having the extraordinary meeting and get two very long motions to consider for the first time. I acknowledge, Councillor Byrne, you got yours to us all by midday. The other, Councillor Porteous, this one I'm only just seeing for the first time now. It makes it really difficult to consider in the absence of staff advice, but particularly written staff advice that we get a chance to consider ahead of time. And for something that is this important and going to have such a far-ranging impact on our residents, no matter which way we jump, I just honestly, I'm a bit lost for words about it, actually. And, you know, and I get the political side of things, but the novelty check is not a great look either. Like when we're getting to this point, it's not, I don't think it behoves the seriousness and the impact that this will have on our residents. Look, I don't really like either of these options, to be honest. I think the harmonisation process, but if I can speak very parochially to my Stanmore Ward residents, obviously the rates harmonisation on its own has a pretty horrendous impact across the board with Stanmore Ward. All of our residents are in the former Marrickville LGA. They're all facing big hikes. I think it's a great shame, and really, it rests on us to that we didn't get the domestic waste management harmonisation in train in time to kind of show that fuller picture to all of our residents, because what that shows to everybody who has had very understandable heart attacks about the fact that their rates are rising 15, 20, 25% at a time in the former Marrickville LGA is it's much more even if we bring into account the fact that we pay much higher waste management charges in our part of the LGA compared to everywhere else. So that's a real shame, and we're going to have to really strongly communicate if, as expected, the government doesn't allow the rates harmonisation to be halted and doesn't allow us to demerge. One thing I would, and I think the big reason, as much as I applaud the sentiment of giving people a chance to have a say on the demerger, I've always supported that position. I took that to election. I would still support that if it was divorced from the implications of not having any fallback position when it comes to minimum rates, because I do think if we're left in a position where we only can implement a minimum rate of 565.
Move an extension of time of 2 minutes.
I will second that motion. All those in favour, against, declare that carried. Please proceed.
Thank you, Councillor Porteous. If we're left in that position where that is the only option we have, yes, there'll be a proportion of residents who will pay much lower rates, but the impact of that will be everybody who has to pay more will pay far, far more. And those percentage swings, we don't have the analysis because that was never modelled, because it would be such an inequitable outcome for our LGA. But we know from the analyses we've seen of other lower minimum rates that it would be really quite extreme for people who have responded in droves to tell us that they're just because their land values at a particular rate doesn't mean they are on high incomes. That often they're in houses that they bought decades ago and they're on fixed incomes now, and they could, if they can't really take into account a 25% hike in rates, they're certainly not going to be in a position to take into account much greater hikes in rates. I do think we need to very seriously consider as a council, if the rates harmonisation goes ahead, how we're going to deliver those improved services to people, particularly where they're paying more or how we can just improve what we're delivering now. And I will note that council officers have indicated that we will be briefed on that next week with some options, and that is something that all of us are very much in tune to. Look, I will just probably leave it there. One thing I would encourage the Greens councillors to do is that if your motion on demerging does not proceed now, that would be something I would encourage you to bring back to a future council meeting, because it is something we can consider separate to this rates harmonisation process, but the risk of considering it tonight and putting that on, I think, is just too great for too many residents.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Councillor Lockie. Further discussion, councillors?
Mayor, I might exercise my right to speak as the seconder of the motion.
Please do.
That's okay, just briefly.
Yeah, thank you.
At the moment that I've lost my voice. So I've listened to the debate and appreciate the gravity with which I think all councillors have been considering this over some significant time, and I appreciate the point that we may not have had a huge amount of time to consider specific motions. I think it's just been difficult for everyone. While we've been considering the briefings and the modelling and the various technicalities of the process, at the same time we've been waiting for the final council paper and grappling with various details that councillors have canvassed tonight. So I appreciate the sentiment with which I think the debate has largely been held tonight, and the seriousness with which every councillor has tried to grapple with the difficulties. Unfortunately, just acknowledging the fact that this is hard for councillors doesn't do anything to solve the problem. And as has been acknowledged, this is not a problem of our making. This is not a process that the current Inner West Council has initiated, and nor is it a process that the Inner West Council, I would assume, would choose to initiate had we had the choice. This is not our process. This has been thrust upon us by the Berejiklian government, and it should not be a surprise, but is yet another example, 3.5 years into the term of this elected council, of the blatant disregard with which this government treats our community. But as I said, just acknowledging that it's hard doesn't solve it. And unfortunately, nor does only listening to part of the story in this. I think the councillors that have raised tonight the point that in our deliberation, we must also consider the impact on our community and on our residents, the people that live and work in the Inner West, for not making any decision. And that is, unfortunately, as a result of the fact that we've been yet again placed in an impossible situation, probably the most unfair outcome. And so it's behoven on all of us to try to find a way through where we are advocating strongly for our community and leading as much as we can in a situation that has been completely thrust upon us. It's not our process. This is not our choice. We do not want to do this, nor do we want to see the state government come through the back door and completely decimate.
Move an extension of 2 minutes.
Seconded. All those in favour, against, declare that carried. Please proceed.
It's not our process. This is not our choice. This is not something that we would choose to do, but we absolutely do not want to see the state government come through the back door and completely decimate the rating structure to the point where it blows up the council, but more importantly, places an absolutely unreasonable burden on a higher proportion of our residents. And that's just not something we can live with, and nor should we. So it's tough, it's difficult for councillors, but at the end of the day, I think what we have to consider is the full picture, as full as we can, and what do the people who live and work in the Inner West and count the Inner West as their home want and need from their council? And that's the advocacy and the leadership to get through a tough situation. It's some guarantee, some level of confidence that the services that this council provides will continue at the level at which they should expect, and that we'll find a fair way through, or the fairest way that we can, and guard against the absolute worst scenario that the state government would thrust upon us if they could. Which is why I'll be supporting the primary motion, why I've moved to second it tonight. So thanks everyone for the contributions. It's difficult, but what's the best we can do for our residents in a process that is not of our choosing?
Could I ask a question before it goes for the vote?
Of course, Councillor Passos.
Is the state government responsible for not mowing the grass verges?
I'm going to rule that that's a rhetorical question, Councillor Passos. Is there further discussion, councillors? Okay, if there's no further discussion, then I'll just clarify where we're up to. We've got a primary motion, a foreshadowed motion, and then two further foreshadowed motions, all of which could be dealt with if the primary motion or the foreshadowed motion is defeated. There's no amendments to either that need to be voted on. So there's no further business other than for me to provide a right of reply, and then for us to vote on each of the motions. So, councillors, thanks very much for such an interesting and committed debate. I concur with many of the things that have been said on all sides of the debate. Just a couple of points of clarification. I don't think that there is a confluence of separate issues here. In the primary motion, I've articulated, Councillor York and I have articulated a concern that the $24 million that we notionally would have been entitled to under a fair distribution of the Stronger Communities Fund would have a big budgetary impact. That's just a statement of fact. $24 million, to put it in context, is more than half of the cost of having just built the Ashfield Aquatic Centre. It's more than double the cost of the heritage restoration of the Dawn Fraser Pool. It's more than we've put in our COVID stimulus into the planting of trees, to which we've allocated $5 million. It's more than our annual footpath and road repairs budget by many-fold. So I don't accept that the issues are unrelated. And let's just be frank here. The impropriety that we've seen around the Stronger Communities Fund is one of the worst frauds in the history of New South Wales. And our community, forget about us as politicians, our residents are the primary victims, us and the residents of Canterbury Bankstown. So I'm not going to make any apology for incorporating those issues into our consideration of the rate system. They are utterly related. Of course, there's a difference between recurrent expenditure and expenditure on services and that of capital investment in infrastructure. That's obvious, but that doesn't mean that the issues are unrelated. And we would be in a position to be much more generous with our local community and to protect them in a better way if we hadn't been cheated out of those funds. So it's important that those issues are raised now because it's topical and important for the government to know that their disregard for our community, in which they not only cheat us out of money, but refuse to respond to any representations in regards to the issue, refuse any meeting. It's not acceptable. It's not okay. Let me put it this way. I did an audit last week of all of the representations that I sent on behalf of this elected body in 2020 to the New South Wales and federal governments, 80 letters in total. Do you know how many replies we received? 7. 7 letters in total. So I think it's time that we belled the cat and we're just frank with the community about the complete and utter disdain that the government, that particularly the New South Wales government, holds for our local community. It's time that we take a stand against it. We should continue to advocate for every practical improvement that we can, but we all need to stand up as a group and take responsibility for getting a fairer deal for the Inner West. I'll conclude my remarks there. I'll now put the Byrne-York recommendation. All those in favour, please raise your hands. and keep them raised. In support, I have councillors Drury, Lockie, McKenna, York, Iskander, Kiat. And I'm not able to see at the moment Councillor Rossetti, or now this is, I'm sure, just an IT issue.
No, Darcy.
For me. Yes?
No.
No, Councillor Rossetti is against. Councillor Hesse, against. Is that right? Yes.
Yeah, sorry, Darcy. Yeah, against.
Councillor De Cruz, against.
Correct, against.
Yes. And Councillor Passis is against, I presume.
Yes,
Yes.
against.
Yes.
Stammer against.
And Councillor Stamoulis against. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 for. And all those against, I'll just read their names out so that we've got clarity. Against, we have Councillors De Cruz, Hesse, Macri, Passis, Porteous, Rossetti, Stamoulis, and Steer. That is 8 against. That has been defeated. Next item, we'll move on to the Porteous Hesse motion.
Sorry, Mayor, could I see that again, please?
Sorry, Councillor, I'm quite certain that I've counted it correctly. In support, we have Councillors Byrne, Drury, Iskander, Kiat, Lockie, McKenna, and York. That is 7. Against, we have Councillors De Cruz, Hesse, Macri, Passis, Porteous, Rossetti, Stamoulis, and Steer. That has been defeated. I'll move on to the foreshadowed motion for de-amalgamation. All those in favour, please raise your hands and keep them raised. In support, I have Councillors De Cruz, Hesse, Steer, Porteous. I believe that is all. All those against, please raise your hands. Against, I have Councillors Drury, Passis, Macri, Lockie, York, Iskander, Stamoulis, Kiat, and myself. That has been defeated.
And Councillor Rossetti.
Councillor Rossetti, are you against the motion?
Yes.
Yep, that's been defeated. Next item, so that means we're able to consider the 2 foreshadowed motions. Councillor Stamoulis has moved the foreshadowed motion that Council immediately commence demerger discussions with state government. These discussions will cover the lack of financial benefits and outcomes for our community, reduced service standards from the merger, much worse representation of residents, ongoing financial stress. Is there a seconder for the motion? That will lapse. We'll move on to the final foreshadowed motion from Councillor Macri that Council requests a deferral from IPART until mid-March 2021. Is there a seconder for that motion?
I will.
Yes.
That,
Could
That
I
is
ask,
seconded by Councillor Rossetti. Do you wish to speak?
could
to
I
it, Councillor?
ask that?
no, thanks.
Councillor,
Sorry, yes,
could
Councillor.
I ask that Councillor Macri also consider writing to OLG for an extension?
I think we've already dealt with that issue, Councillor. Councillor Macri is envisaging that Council would enter into the IPART process, not the local government New South Wales process. Is that correct, Councillor Macri? Yeah, so that's a separate issue. So that's not incorporated into, that's not an amendment we can vote on in relation to this motion.
Can I
So
get
I'll
a
put-
clarification from Councillor Macri? We're talking about an extra couple of weeks from the 1 March deadline. What is it envisaged that Councillor Macri hopes that Council would undertake in that period of time?
I'm sorry, Councillor, we've concluded the debate. We've actually been going for 2 hours. So the debate has concluded. Councillor Macri has addressed questions.
Just a point of order, Councillor Byrne.
Yes, what is the clause in the Code of Meeting Practice you're referring to?
Well, this foreshadowed motion was not able to be put on the books until the previous motions were dealt with. So we effectively haven't had an opportunity to debate this at all or to ask any clarification questions on it because we are now looking at it for the first time.
No, I'm sorry, that's not correct because it's actually a component of the primary motion which has been debated at length and which there's been multiple questions about. So I'm going to put the foreshadowed motion. All those in favour of the Macri-Rossetti motion for deferral, please raise your hands.
No, that's
In support, we have Councillors Drury, Passis, Macri, Lockie, Rossetti, York, McKenna. And all those against? Against, please raise your hands and keep them raised. Against, we have councillors De Cruz, Steer, Stamoulis, Porteous, Kiat, and myself. Must have missed someone because that's 8-6. So the motion will be carried, but I'm not sure who the 7th person against is. Can all those against please raise their hands? Against, I have councillors Steer, Stamoulis, Kiat, Porteous, De
Darcy, you're
Cruz.
showing us for it when you said you were against.
I am against the motion. That's correct. That still leaves us one short. Sorry.
I
I'm
think
having trouble
Councillor
with the
Scando's
screen.
crossed out there.
What's that?
Councillor Scander's left.
The Scander's gone.
Okay, that has been, that makes it 14 all, and I'll use my casting vote to vote against the motion. That has been defeated. There is no resolution of the council. I declare the meeting closed.
Everybody, we'll talk about this more at some stage.
Very good chairing. This needs to be resolved, Darcy. You don't close a meeting unresolved. Very poor.
He's already left.
It's very poor.